Can you start by just telling us a little bit about who you are? And yeah, let's just begin there. Who are you? What should people know
What
about who you
am
are?
I? My first name is kuwa, jasiri, and maybe I would say I'm an explorer. I've never really identified in that one word, but in this moment, I am becoming new. I think maybe that's something for people to know that I'm dropping a lot of old habits, be it of my own creation, generational, and moving into just a new space of like care, softness, authenticity. Um, yeah, and I have a strong focus on myself and rest, which I love. But then, of course, we're doing this interview because I do a lot of community work as well and find that balance. I think the new me has found that balance. So that feels really nice to have sustained myself in community work or the beginning of it.
I love that so much. And I love starting with that question because it gives people an opportunity to just hear the human that you are before we get to the work that you do. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. You did start to mention that you are a community oriented person and show up in community a lot of different ways. One of the ways that I came to your work is finding out that you are a birth worker or birth keeper. I would love to hear more about how you show up in that role.
Love it. I consider myself part of the community, and I feel sometimes as care providers, we're like, that's the community, and then like I'm separate. And so that's something that I'm working on. And within being part of the community, um, I primarily offer care to others, or just, yeah, I guess I would say to others, losing my question. Um, but I find myself mostly working with other care providers around capacity and I would say courage, and like I was saying too, that we are a part of community versus like separate. And I apologize, but I did lose what your actual question was.
It's okay. It's okay. If you ever go off on a tangent in our interview, that is okay because there are gems there too that I welcome. Um, I was just asking about your role as a birth keeper. How did you get into that work? How do you show up in communities as a birth keeper? If you can say more about that.
So I came to it, um, I would say through seeds, planting like seeds or just the seeds that you plant. Um, and like literally, I feel like it keeps coming. And I think that's my other intersection is spiritually. A lot of what I offer as a birth worker is spiritual. But in my own path of just wanting to be more self sufficient, I came to seeds, growing my own food, that was more strenuous than I had anticipated. And so I started learning about perennial plants that kind of are more tenacious, grow themselves, native plants, wild plants. And that brought me to herbalism. And so, in my quest to learn more about herbalism, um, I found this like woman who was a retired midwife who had an herbal school. So not a lot, but part of my herbalism training is by a home birth midwife. And so um, that was a thing that wasn't necessarily like, I want to go learn birth work, but it was just like part of the program that I found. Um, and then from the spiritual realm, spirit babies, like the spirits of babies that will incarnate I would say specifically into humans, but also it could just be a soul that could go into anything really. But ever since I was about 14, they've always just spoke to me, and we've always had kind of a spiritual connection that I started pursuing more, I would say tangibly, or just pursuing it versus just letting it happen to me. And so those are the primary ways through like herbal medicine and the spiritual realm is how I am a birth worker.
Wow, that's really interesting. And um, I think that especially after the onset of the pandemic, a lot of folks are better. Mm, that's not the word. A lot of folks are more in tune or attuned to the connection between planting seeds, both literally and figuratively, and birth work, and just how they work together. And so I think it's really beautiful that your path is been set in that way. Um, yeah. Wow. Where in the world are you exactly? It wasn't clear to me in looking up your information.
Perfect.
Perfect.
um, I am in Pueblo territory. So those are the indigenous people who are on the colonial, not are on, but whose land was colonized and now called Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I've just been here for a moment of, I think we counted 5 moon cycles. So um, it is kind of new for me to be in this town, but it is a town that I'm planning on creating some kind of foundation and roots in. So that's exciting.
That is exciting. I'm familiar with that area. I've been there a couple of times. I probably haven't experienced it in the way that you have, so I'm even more curious to know what your experiences have been. Um, when you are talking about your connection to seeds and just wanting to grow your own food, can you say more about what it is that you grow and just what that process has been like? Tell us more.
Yes, so I told you at the beginning, and now I'm mostly doing my Ghanaian heritage plants. Sorghum. So I've had my ancestral garden for this is my third season growing seeds that I've grown and collected. Sorghum, okra. I would say those are the main ones. There's a few I grew, but the seeds didn't actually the seeds that I saved didn't germinate. So just even kind of that journey of um, remembering my own ancestry coming here, being kidnapped, coming here as slaves through the transatlantic slave trade, and them braiding seeds into their hair, and just that journey of just like not even being sure they're gonna germinate, but I guess like a duty. A lot of my life, I feel like I have a duty, or maybe it's just a purpose or an intertwining. But that's also what I love about my garden. It's bringing me closer to myself.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that just context, culturally, as far as your heritage and just the context of, um, yeah, the power, the ancestral power of resisting through bringing seeds from the motherland to a captive land. Like that's really, um, something that I know, but I don't know if, and something that more and more people have been reclaiming as our history. But yeah, thank you for bringing that into our conversation. Um, Sorghum and okra. Wow, I have tried planting my own seeds, and it's something that, yeah, it's a process. It's not easy, especially if you're doing it on your own and like trying to figure things out. So I commend you. I commend you a lot. Um, so you are in Pueblo territory, on Pueblo lands. What is the climate like there? Specifically, if you can speak to what the birth keeper world looks like, what is happening where you are?
With the preface, I'm new in town, but oddly enough, just like how you notice things that you've heard before come back around. Um, I've actually like known birth workers who lived here prior. Um, so some of the information I have is like because I've been kind of loosely related with the town. Um, and also I haven't super followed up with any of that. Like, is it still current? But I did do a slight little bit of research so I could come with something. Um, but I would say, firstly, just like legalities, I guess it's called, because there's a lot of government kind of oversight in birth work. Um, and so that's something that's happening, not really happening here. It's a lot more loose to do home births. It's like considered fairly regular. Um, and and as far as the law goes, it's like a super valid profession that doesn't really have much like stigma or loopholes or anything like that. I know when I was further north in Arapaho territory, people were like making contracts and saying things like accidental home birth, and there's all these like languages to kind of protect yourself legally. And here there's just a lot more, I would say, respect for the profession as a profession. And even with like cultural and indigenous knowledge, which a lot of home birth, I would say, is, but also can be because there is like very clinical home births. um, so that's something I love here. And then you're probably familiar and maybe not super familiar, but I feel like there's the rhetoric that there's a lot of anti-gender queer bills in Congress right now. Um, and it is nice to know too that for how many bills there are, only about 10% are passing throughout the country. So I'm super grateful for that. But in Pueblo territory, well, everywhere, well, not everywhere, but a lot of the country, kind of central Turtle Island, is upping their anti trans bills. New Mexico just passed a series of bills that actually protect against, well, not against, protect for name and gender privacy. There's a bunch of like trans discrimination laws on the books now, and that's like, now going to be like a hate crime or more like in that field of protection. No out of state attacks can happen. So if people are coming here as queers for care, they are protected. And so that's really great. I feel like with the work I do, because it kind of pulls people. Um, and then there's statewide protection. So all of these laws are statewide. And so people can also travel like rurally to the places, or I would say too, a lot of our resources are rurally because the indigenous people are given that liberty to home birth. And so I feel like that's a little bit different than the rest of the country. Like a lot of people come from rural areas to the city, and we kind of do the opposite to get care, or we can, because there is care. I guess nationally, I also heard a lot of rural hospitals are closing because the doctors are like retiring, and the younger generation is either moving to the city or doesn't want to do it. Um, so I've been loving that, and I would say that's reflected in the city as a whole. There's just a lot more acceptance and respect for, I would say, genderqueer people. I'm not sure if it like goes to people of culture, people of color, and I think that's something that this or like a lot of places have, but this town I'm noticing is that it can be very queer friendly, but very European. And it's like, okay, that's cool. Um, so that's a thing. There's home birth centers. There's like three in town. They're like, or I guess they're not necessarily home birth centers, but standalone birth centers. So I think we have three in town. And then I was saying rurally, I think there's like three around that people can go to. Um, and I felt like I've seen a few just like around town, like just on a healthcare window. It's just like queer friendly, safe zone. And that's been really um, quite lovely to notice. Um, so I've been really loving that. It seems like very hospitable and open to the work I want to do, which I think maybe I've lived in other places that was like counter to that.
Yes, you bring up so many things. Yeah, just the differences in living in a rural community, but specifically living in a rural community in New Mexico is so different than what I've witnessed. So I'm right now based in Florida, okay, and all of what you mentioned about the triumphs that New Mexico can celebrate around being queer friendly, being gender queer friendly, um, accepting home birth as a respectable practice, like Florida is going in the opposite direction, as we know. So it's refreshing to hear that New Mexico is doing the right thing. And then I think I saw on something like on your website or something that at some point you were in, yeah, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute lands. I was living and working in Denver for a while, and so kind of familiar with that area and leading down into New Mexico, and how a lot of the policies that are happening in both places are pretty similar. So, yeah, it's refreshing to bring that perspective. Definitely want to uplift that that's what's happening. Um, let me see. Yeah, I think that's something that people can definitely be inspired by. Are there any challenges that you're seeing, um, even amidst or amid all those triumphs?
Yes. Like amidst the triumphs, I was saying too that the people of culture, what I call people of color, that doesn't necessarily seem to be taken care of, at all. Definitely not in the same way as kind of like queer acceptance is sweeping through. Which is like yay for the victories we get, but also like, okay, there's intersections, there's other kinds of people. And I would also say terminology, I wouldn't necessarily say that's regional, but in my practice, a lot of what we do is like write our own narratives, find the words that really define us. Um, and so a lot of the terminology comes from slavery, servitude, it's gender based. It's exclusive of like how you can grow a family. Um, and that's something I would say in every area of my life that I'm having to contend with. But and it's going okay, even as a negative, it is moving forward. I would also say birth workers of culture, as like your practitioner resembles your identity. There's like, I don't believe in like colonized credentials, and I'm not seeking them for myself. But in, I think it's all of New Mexico, there's only one African. Are they a midwife? I think they're a midwife, but if they're a doula, I feel like that's even sadder. Even sadder. But just how like so many people, so little people of the Afro diaspora are actual practitioners, is a thing, and how to actually get us qualified, and in that role. I would say another triumph is that there's a lot of birth worker apprenticeships, like that way of learning is still very prevalent. And kind of what I was saying before, Indigenous practices are welcomed, and that's like a more ancient practice. So just trying to figure out how to get people of culture educated or even in the room, just that osmosis experience of becoming a birth worker. And kind of what I was saying, that courage, because kind of when you're just like, don't have opportunities and people don't really notice you, just to put yourself there anyway can be a whole thing. So I think those are the big things.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I hear you kind of calling for a racial analysis of what's happening, especially in the queer conversation. Like, um, that, yeah, people of culture are being left behind in that conversation often, or even maybe scapegoated. Um, I mean,
I mean, it happens.
call it, call it how it is.
I heard that. I was like, oh, the truth.
And also just, yeah, I love, love, love. I mean, my blog is called Deeply Rooted. So I love just a push for a deeper analysis of all the things. So thanks for taking us there. And um,
Can I offer you some of the words I came up with?
yes, please teach us.
Okay. Well, they're all being workshopped, but this is what I came up with that I was like, okay, I feel like I can share these because they actually have some concepts. Intergenerational family home care, home health care, gender affirming care, reproductive health care. Maybe I would say those are the kinds of cares we offer.
Yeah, that's beautiful. The first one that you said, intergenerational.
Family home care.
Yeah, yeah. Like, you don't have any questions about what that means. You know exactly, like you can close your eyes and
Ooh.
say that and just imagine, like, you can paint the picture for somebody with language like that. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah. um I wanted to ask you something, and then my mind went in a lot of different directions. I think I was leaning toward, um I want to give you some room to talk about authentic creations, artistic apothecary. Um, I watched, I think, your YouTube video where you introduced the work and gave like it was like a 5-minute video or something, gave like an overview. So I know a little bit about it, but I don't know when that was. It may have been a while ago and things change. Um, well, yeah, tell us what Authentic Creations Artistic Apothecary is today.
Today, it truly is me resting. Doing this interview. Um, so Authentic Creations Artistic Apothecary came out of my Indigenous solidarity work with the Dene people who live on Turtle Island, centrally in what's colonial, like the Four Corners in the Southwest, and doing pretty much mutual aid for them. And in that, the elders sharing their stories and pride of who they are, and just knowing who they are and wanting to know more about who they are, and their conviction to be themselves no matter what. Um, Doing that work, I would say I was already doing community work, but that's where this this name iteration came from, and sparking this organization and being like, this is the work I want to be doing, not like my side job. And so this is now my full job. And so that was about 12 years ago. And we still do Indigenous solidarity with the Dene. I just came back from my first solo trip. So to me, that means you made it. Because I remember when someone brought me on my first trip out there, and ever since I've always gone with other people who kind of had the connections, the more direct connections. So now I have direct connections, also with Hopi people, which is nice too. The Hopi people live adjacent, and it's just been beautiful. And so our work has evolved, and this iteration, we're doing the Indigenous Solidarity, where we do ancestral return trips where we bring people back to their ancestral land. Um, we're working on land reparations right now, which I think is the biggest thing we've ever um, that that's going to be a big thing and be the home care center, and also hopefully the residents of the team that offers you care. I'm like, what other little things are we doing? There's the African Heritage Garden, which we touched on. Oh, birth work, that's probably what you're most interested in. So I do spiritual birth work, which is all things spiritual, but my favorite is dream work. Kind of just interpreting the messages of the dream world. And all the care I offer is like, you know what's best for you. You know, I'm more of just a conduit, or like a chitter chatter, or someone who asks questions to like direct you, but we definitely believe it comes from within. We create educational zines. Right now I'm working on Rest as Reparations. Probably the next one. I keep saying I'm going to be out the zine game. I used to make like one a season. So now I'm making like one every 3 years. But they're all free online as PDFs and cover mostly nature-based topics. And then we have our zero waste element. So everything we're doing is also teaching us to be better stewards of the land, in stewardship with the land, and just refusing modernization because it's really killing us all. And all of our programs are gender affirming, and we don't necessarily do anything that's like super specific about gender. We just have a lot of programs that are geared towards genderqueer people of culture participating in them. I think that's the skinny. And so our dream is to create an intergenerational family care team, and kind of like a one-stop place for genderqueer people of culture to get care, by us, for us, grant funded, reparations resourced space. And that's why I moved to the town I live in, because I heard European women were doing land back in my social circle, which is like the closest I've ever come to any European giving us anything. And so I was like, I need to move there. So reparations, of course, are different than land back to the indigenous Turtle Island people. But it feels on the same plane. And it's like, okay, if they can understand land back, they can understand reparations. And I need people who already get it. So that's what we're doing.
So necessary. So necessary. All of it. And for the record, I reached out to you not only because I'm interested in birth work, but because of how birth works is situated within all that you just named.
Yeah.
Your perspective, and experience and expertise and wisdom, around all of it is what was like, I need to reach out to them. So, yeah, I loved hearing about all of it. I specifically want to ask about solidarity. Um,
Mhm.
I think that in the past, and I'm like going off on a tangent a little bit, but I hope that's okay. I think in the past, I don't know, let's just say 10 years or so, we've seen examples of solidarity, specifically between indigenous communities and other folks, other people of culture, and probably not nearly enough, uh, I would say, right? And
Yeah.
so I would love to just give you some space as a person who has worked in solidarity movements with indigenous communities to talk a little bit about why it's important. Um, yeah.
Love it. Um, yeah, like I was saying, solidarity work is really at the root, the seed. I would say it's the seed of what I do, right? It's not necessarily the root, but it's definitely the seed. And I think there's different, of course, like everything, there's different solidarity work. And so what I like to point out is like social justice versus and environmental justice, because a lot of the solidarity work is the intersection of that. And so social justice is more of what I do now, is going to people's homes and offering like resources and labor, and getting to know them like at home. And then there's the equivalent of like, maybe people call it an action camp, or what we might see or what we might witness from like Standing Rock or something, that like what's happening in Denata on the Dene land is with Peabody Coal and forced relocation, as they want to create a, not want to create, they're on their like third coal mine um, in like their region, because they have the largest coal reserve in the world, like underground. And pretty much that's what indigenous people are doing when they're like what I would call like out in the field, or doing environmental justice, like against deforestation or oceans. Well, the ocean was on fire, people. Okay. Okay. And so that's what I would say. There's two different avenues, and I kind of like grew up, or first was in the environmental justice, going to action camps, think Greenpeace kind of situations. I'm not sure how linked Greenpeace is with like the actual indigenous, but the work they do, if you think of just generically protecting the world, or when you think of like peacekeepers, water keepers, water protectors, land protectors. Maybe you know about the people who go up in the trees and tree sit and stuff like that. Those are environmental justice. And you can do that obviously like very European kind of anarchist, or you can do it like in solidarity with the direction of the indigenous people and have it more in that alignment. And then socially, I would say that's also easier to get into. If you don't have any connections, there's usually a call to action by a community. You know, the Dene kind of have like a running call out for supporters. And so you'll come across that, and that's a way to get into it. And then you can make those more personal connections where you're going back to those people's home, because right, they don't always live on the front lines. Sometimes, like all of us, right, burnout, you gotta go home. And being there at their homes, their indigenous life ways, the Dene herd sheep, like think shepherd, going out with the sheep for most of the day, for miles up and down. And for me, that was like just not tangible, as like, physicality. My orientation, I was just like, everything looks the same. And oh, I got stuck in the mud. It was a whole hot mess. But realizing like, I think too, in social justice, there's a little bit more room to like bring what you know, but also in environmental justice, you're at a camp, apply yourself however you can, offer your skills. And that's what I do with the Dene now. I came in as a sheep herder, and now I do gardens with them, and they're doing their dry land gardening techniques. And I'm just mostly bringing resources and people, so that the elders can keep it going, because it's just a lot. Like you were just talking about gardening. I'm like, be 70 and have like, have no running water, have no electricity, be out there by yourself because your whole family moved to the city. Like that is what's happening, but also like I feel like sometimes we're like, oh, they're living in poverty, but they also don't have running water and electricity by choice. Like they want to live in closeness with the land. And I think that's what I learned in the social aspect of it is more their actual story versus like the story the organization puts out or just the story of the movement or whatever it is. And to really get to know like their plight, but triumph and situation and their real needs. Cause I think I'm just thinking of like the depictions of like kids in Africa. And I'm like, that's not what's happening, folks. And so just to get the real story, right, you need to go to the people. And I've sat at their feet and heard their stories. And, I've also been working alongside them, hearing their stories or just working alongside them and becoming part of their story. And um, those are the ways you consolidate.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all that. I definitely hope to uplift that message in this sharing because yeah, I think that we as people who have been impacted by white supremacy, colonialism, etc., like we need each other. Like we need to um be supporting each other more robustly, more genuinely, more just more. Just more. Just more. And yeah, the powers that be are very skilled at making sure that that doesn't happen. And so any ways that we can share resources, information, and encourage more of that, I'm all here for it. Um, let's see.
Yay.
So I do want to ask, I guess specifically, you mentioned some ways that folks can consolidate, but I'm curious, from your perspective as the founding steward of Authentic Creations, like what support do you need to better serve your community?
Love it. I finally was honest with myself that I need an office assistant, and now I have one, and everything just gets done. Holy badoli, that's been like, it's a game changer. I think I always think that about myself is like how much I get done with no support. And I've been thinking lately, like, what is my capacity with support if I'm already just so amazing? I mean, so that's one way. I would say two, I always have wanted to be part of a team. And I think that's important that um there's like an established team that knows each other and also has backups. And that's something I definitely want to grow into is having that team. And then I was saying we all live together, inseparable. um Support. What I was saying specifically for genderqueer people of culture is having those intersections more cared for and finding, I guess, practitioners, but just community in general that is activated towards that. Um, yeah, I want a home care facility. I feel that is what I need um, to get my own care. Like I feel like I'm building this so I can go in and be like, let me see the person. Um, so that's a thing. A birth center, some kind of just long term, what's it called? Like a facility that's long term and has that stability. And I think all this too is like community support as I am part of the community, but I'm like, the more I talk about it, I do like just everything I do is like to benefit all of us. And yeah, better support. Intergenerational things. I guess what's it called when like someone gives you fellowship? I need someone to give me like fellowship and steward my growth. um that would be nice. and figuring out this 501(c)(3) status fiscal sponsor thing. I need that to be more secure because we've had a fiscal sponsor in the past and literally we signed a 5-year contract and then like so soon after they were like, "Oh, we can't help you anymore." And I was like, I need something better. And I think more, I don't like the word ownership, but I think a lot of times Africans have been bamboozled. Like even when people gave us stuff, like legally we didn't own it. So what's that, like knowledge or like research or another person giving me fellowship on all this legality? Because I'm trying to pool resources for us communally, but I'm realizing if I don't understand it legally, that's what happened before. They just take it and they're like, "Oh, but you didn't file blah blah." And I'm like, "Well, you also didn't tell me to." And I'm like, um, so I think that too is really getting the information that I need to be successful and having, I need a better word for like mentor, but is fellower a word?
Enough
Oh,
words earlier are to be, you know, I love it. Um, I was gonna, if you didn't point it out already, I was going to say that you said that you are the community. So I absolutely see all this coming to fruition. I hope that I'm sure just um I'm sure that by what you offered when we first started our conversation about where you are right now in your own self-reflection and just self-discovery, it's just very clear that that's happening in your response to this question. And um, yeah, I hope that saying it out loud, even once again, and having it in this permanent creation that I'm working on will bring it to fruition even more. Thank you for that.
yes, gives me a little timeline. I need to make sure one of these things are done before this gets published.
Listen, and that, and hopefully it can be a like, hey, if anybody knows somebody that knows more about
Yeah.
501(c)(3s, like, reach out, connect. Like, I hope to be a connector, if nothing else.
Yay.
Um, so as we start to wrap up, I just want to leave space for, anything else that you might want to share that we didn't touch on. If anything, no pressure.
No pressure. We didn't super talk about it, but I loosely was talking about the spiritual birth work, and that I love dream work the most, but I also do and encourage like ritual and ceremony. Um, I think too, another thing that I want to bring to birth to amplify within birth, back to birth, is culture, our ancestral cultures, and just encouraging people like do a little research, like um, either vaguely if you only know the continent you originate from, African birth traditions, um, and then more specifically, like I'm from Ghana, I would do like Ghanaian, or more specifically like the Ga people, um, and find out different things about what they're doing and what is like put inable to your birth and the birth plan. Um, yeah, I think is really important and something, another way to just connect with the experience.
Absolutely. It's definitely something that I encourage in my practice as well. So thank you for like running that back. Such an important point. Um, while we have a little time, I want to ask a follow-up question to it. Um, in my experience, a person of African descent, African American, and working with a lot of Black families who, yeah, don't necessarily know um, their heritage in that way, but can generalize and have, an overarching interest in African practices. Um, I find that some people are either afraid because of the rhetoric that has been spewed, or hesitant because there's a level of respect that they want to approach it with. It they don't want to be almost appropriating practices that they don't know for sure are their own. Can you speak to that at all, as a person who is Ghanaian and
Yeah.
approaching that practice?
Yes, and I would say I didn't always know I was Ghanaian, right? It was a search. And first I connected kind of more with the American ideals of Africa, kind of, I think was like Ethiopia, is kind of like the monolith sometimes with Swahili and things like that. And that's where I kind of went to because what I was seeing in America was kind of like, if you're African, do this. So I would say anything that's coming to you, I would say a big part of it all is intuition. And if you haven't developed that, one, you can. And two, I would say start with a seed. That's just my favorite thing ever. Like a black eyed pea, I guess is what came to mind. Or, there's some kind of available African seeds and maybe just make a little altar or just even plant the seed in your windowsill with like, I'd like to learn more about my culture. And then back to what I was saying about dreams, then pay attention, raise your attention to the answer coming to you, however you receive answers in general. Because I feel like some people also have that hesitance with spirituality or magic. I think I was just going to say, put the seed on an altar, on your dresser or in a little jar that you bless. It can be whatever you want it to be. And it doesn't have to be like, this is from this place. Because there are things that we can do that are kind of generic, right? There's seeds everywhere. There's prayer everywhere. There's, reverence everywhere. And however you already give gratitude, just implement the practices you already have, but start to ask the question of, who am I? Where do I come from? What's my culture? What's my ethnicity? Um, because we can spiritually learn these things versus like in the physical realm. And I think sometimes too, we give the physical realm so much, like you got to get educated there. You got to like put in your experience there and your labor. I would tell you, I labor so much in the spirit world. And there was a part of my life where I literally lived in the spirit world more so than the physical world because it's just nicer. It's like, um, but to just start moving forward, whatever that means. Did you think about the stars? Research that. Do you have a planetarium? Stay up at night. Whatever it is, it can be so simple. And remember to make it simple. The best magic is so simple. And if things grow from that, give gratitude and push into it. And if it's just, or not just, if it is a seed on an altar, that's all you need. Know that it will come from you and that is all you need. So that's where it starts.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad our conversation went in that direction. Thank you. Um,
Yeah.
Gems all day. I have really, really, really enjoyed and appreciated our conversation. So,
Thank you.
um, thank you. Um, I'm done. I'm done.
Okay, that was perfect.